one for Zoom. Oh,
So,
apparently my camera is off. So you can't see the great tan that I picked up while I've been down here in Florida, and I apologize.
that's all good. Tom told us he was out playing golf today, so I wanted to show off the good tan you got.
Yeah.
Very good. I was just telling him about me trying to do a bit of Wim Hof, cold showers, and some breathing exercises, and how it takes some time getting used to this. But yeah,
I can imagine. Yes. There's Sue. Hi, Sue. Should probably wait for everybody to get on. Otherwise, I'll apologize to each new person here.
Hello, Tom. It's Justine here.
Hi. Good to see you, Justine.
And good to hear you, even though I can't see you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's good to be heard. Matthew, good to see you. Thanks for joining.
You're welcome. Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'll share some good news that I got. I've still been doing publishing in various journals on the principles, and I sent a paper off to. I didn't even realize there was this journal, but there is an international journal of childhood spirituality, and I just discovered it. And thought, wow, isn't this neat? This would be a great place to start sharing the principles with people who are working with children. And so I researched the literature on perfectionism and wrote a paper on trying to clarify a lot of the gaps. It's interesting when you understand the principles, and I've been blessed to be, one of the few academicians who have discovered the principles and then not been caught up in my intellect so much that I couldn't see the value, the simplicity, and then being able to kind of go in and look at the literature in a number of different areas. Perfectionism is one. Another is forgiveness. And to kind of be able to look through the principles, which is kind of like looking at all of this research, knowing a new language, and seeing the gaps in understanding in these literatures, because the researchers have been looking at the issue from the outside in. And then having a level of it's interesting, recently my level of understanding of the principles has just deepened. I did a paper with Dicken Bettinger on free will, and a paper with Jack Pransky on what's called maladaptive repetitive thought. And all of these areas that I've mentioned, the literature is pointing to the principles. But it's like it's hidden from them because of their outside in view. And the good thing that happened today was that I just got word from this International Journal of Childhood Perfectionism, and they want to revise and resubmit on what I sent. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. And the issues that they mentioned were very interesting issues. The paper was well received, and there were a lot of nice comments, but there were various issues that were given to me. It's interesting. I can pull up here. I'll kind of tell you what one of the reviewers said. He said, "Your article is topical and informative. It clearly identifies gaps in understanding in relation to the perfectionism literature. You've addressed these gaps in understanding using the lens of the three principles. You have convincingly described the three principles as a key, not only to combating perfectionism, but as a key to general well-being. You have made a strong argument for the three principles mental health education and contrasted it with two other strategies. It would strengthen your article if clinical trials using the three principles education were to be cited. Such examples could flesh out the principles by describing conditions for learning, any problems emerging, the timing involved, and perhaps the particulars of language used in relation to different ages of children in learning programs. The lack of these details reduces the impact of this article, as it remains an article which goes no further than advocating the principles themselves. Now, whoops, I kind of brought this up, and now can you still hear me?
We can, yes.
You can. Okay, good. The interesting thing there, I don't know if you people know this or not, but there's been a major happening. Some of you, if not all of you, may be familiar with Brooke Wielden Reese and her program Spark. They just received, along with Innate Health Research, a multi-year, multi-million-dollar grant from the U.S. Department of Education to take the principles, or the way Spark teaches the principles, into middle school settings around the country. And just an amazing, I think, huge grant. And so what I'll do is I'll be using that happening and some of the research that's been done on the Spark program to answer that reviewer's question. What happens when you get an article and they want you to revise and resubmit it, you've got to take each comment from each reviewer, put the comment down, and then tell them what you've done to review or to handle that comment. Let me see here. There you go. I'm back to looking at you people now. Now I know what to do. So anyway, I'm thrilled about that. One of my big goals with doing this research, just privileged to be one of the first people to write about this and have it published in journals, was to have it catch on and get other people. Because as the so-called pioneers in this get a little bit older, it's amazing to see it moving on with a lot of young people or younger people like Rowan and the others that I've mentioned. And so this is just a wonderful thing for all of us that this grant has been given.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tom, that's awesome. I think we've got a bit of a quorum here, so we may kick off. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. If you don't know Tom, the official bio that I got is a professor emeritus at Wayne State University, a licensed psychologist and mental health educator. Tom has authored a number of books. I think, Tom, is 3 books, if I got it right?
Yeah, this is the 3rd book.
The 3rd book done, and over 100 papers published in peer-reviewed journals, books, and periodicals. Now, the reason why when I started Three Principles, I don't want to say started it, but from an organization perspective, when I wanted to do this type of work in Australia, I was always being asked, show us research, where's some data? Right? And at the beginning of that, I think it's probably around 2016, 2017, I think was the first time I've actually reached out to Tom to interview him, to have a chat, and to start looking at all of his papers, so I can get a little bit more of evidence-based backing that I can take into organizations, discuss with people when I'm being challenged, when I'm being asked some of these questions. So since then, Tom brought out a new book, Upside Down and Backwards, is his newest book. I'll see with my background if I can show it. Yep, it seems to be popping through in and out. Is his latest work, and I thought, well, let's get him on from an Australian perspective in our time zone, as I always try and do, and then get a bit of a view and introduce him as well. If you haven't met Tom before, a bit of his life journey, his engagement with SIT, why he does research. So we'll do a bit of what we call a fireside chat, a bit of a Q&A. And about 20, 30 minutes in, I'll then take a back seat and open it up for any questions from you guys. If there's anything in particular you want to ask or go a bit deep in. It is recorded, so I just wanted to make sure you are aware of that. We couldn't get Tom's camera working, unfortunately, so he'll be the voice today, and we'll go from there. Tom, thank you very much. Tom, can we maybe start with you? And if you can maybe tell us more about a bit more about your background, your sort of engagement with the principles, and how you sort of got introduced to this, if you don't mind.
No, I'd be happy to. I started my work as a professor at Wayne State in the Department of Criminality and Criminal Justice. I worked at the Juvenile Justice Center in Detroit, Michigan. I was a probation officer, a child abuse worker, and wrote a federal grant for the juvenile court and got a lot of programs funded, including a program that involved matching up college students with kids who had come into the juvenile court. And we did research on that. And we found that the college students had a much better result with these kids in terms of improving their grades and reducing their criminal activity than the juvenile court probation officers had. And I wasn't quite sure why. In my papers, I indicated some possibilities for the reason. And I was also seeing patients in a private practice. And every summer, I would go to the bulletin board in our clinic where they had all of the in-service training documents in there where you could sign up for something new. And I would see 10, 12, 15 different programs: Gestalt therapy, reality therapy, transactional analysis, behavior therapy. And I would sit there and look and think, God, which one of these has the answer? And I would finally kind of get tired of looking and decide, well, the one I'm doing isn't, the one I'm using isn't that bad. And so I'll just stick to that. And, but I always knew that there was something missing. And I was a searcher. I mean, I was doing programs, I was doing my own therapy. And I finally signed up for a training that was very popular in the 70s and 80s. I don't know, some of you may have heard of it. It was called the EST training, EST. And it was a 2-weekend training. I flew to Chicago for 2 weekends. And I was very nervous and wondering whether I'd made the right decision. In the book I wrote about the training, the night before, I had 3 cold sores that erupted on my lower lip. And I was very self-conscious of how I looked. I mean, that's not why you're not seeing me here tonight, but I was. And I tried to base those critters all night with some medicine I got at a drugstore, and I tried to put a Band-Aid over them and then I realized the Band-Aid was more conspicuous than the cold sores. I went into the training. But the interesting thing, after 2 weekends in this training, people who got up the first day and said a number of issues, many of which were worse than my average client, but after 2 weekends, there seemed to be a miraculous difference in the state of mind of many, many of these people. And the training I was in, there were 180 people. And so I left. And interestingly, my state of mind had changed. I called my mother and sister and told them how much I loved them. I apologized for past things that I had done. I forgave them for grievances that I was holding on to, but I had no idea how this thing worked. And so what happened, and there was a name that they gave to these people back then for people that didn't do the training, they called them S-holes. So I became an S-hole, meaning because I didn't know how it worked, I got addicted to the training. And so when my state of mind got bad again, I figured, well, my God, I was missing something that I must have gotten from this training. And so I would do a seminar. And the way the training worked was you told your friends about it and you brought them in, and it was kind of like, doing a 12-step program and trying to figure out what happened during that training that I got. Why can't I keep it? Why didn't it persist? But at the end of this training, they had each person come up to the front of the room, and the assignment was say something outrageous. Well, I got up and I didn't know what I was going to say, but I'll tell you what I said. It sounds somewhat arrogant when I look back, but I said, I am committed to transforming the fields of psychology and criminology. Because I knew there was something that happened during that training that would do that, but I had no idea what it was. And so I started kind of proselytizing for the training. And then I was in a drugstore in Birmingham, Michigan one day, looking for a book to read on a flight down to Florida. And I saw a book in this drugstore section called Sanity, Insanity, and Common Sense. This was 1989. And I picked up the book, and there was something about the book that spoke to me. I bought the book and read the book and saw connections between the book and what I experienced in this training. Now, the book was written by Roger Mills, Darlene Stewart, and Rick Suarez. I don't know, some of you may be familiar with the book. It was one of the first written items about the principles. However, back then there were 4 principles, and a couple of them were not even the ones that exist now. But that's where they were with the principles. Interestingly enough, Roger and the others who wrote the book were very much connected with their ideology that they hadn't yet let go of, and they were trying to squeeze what they got from Sid into their ideologies. Interesting. Same thing that I did. We might go into that later on. Anyway, I get on the phone and I call Rick Suarez, one of the authors, and I say, look, I read your book. It's interesting. Have you guys all done the S training? And Rick said, well, no, we've actually been asked that before, but no, we haven't done that. And he said, you might be interested in coming down to a conference and seeing what we have to say. Well, guess where the conference was? The same city in Florida that I was flying to, that I got the book to read. Interesting. So I got down there and went to the 8th annual conference of Psychology of Mind, which was what this understanding was called back in 1989. So I go to this conference as Dr. Kelly. I'm thinking, well, aren't they privileged to have me there? I'm one of the few academicians and the few licensed psychologists that's there. I wasn't as attached to my ego as I would have been 10 years before, but I still was. So I get there, and guess what I see? And I remember I'm a professor in criminology and criminal justice. And so what I see is a presentation where there are 3 single women, African-American women, from a community in South Florida called Modelo. Some of you know that Jack Pransky wrote a book called Modelo that talks about how that community was transformed because Roger Mills, who wrote the foreword to my book, went to Modelo where police wouldn't even patrol and went door to door, knocking on the door, inviting these women, and it was mainly single parent women, to the community center to find out about the principles. And Roger would say, God, these women would come to the door and crack the door open and look out and wonder, who's this little white guy? You know, which was very unusual in this community. Roger finally got 2 or 3 women to come to the center and talk to them about the principles. He said a lot of them would come for the food. A lot of them who came would fall asleep because they felt safe. So the next presentation at the conference were how they were bringing these principles into jails and prisons. And I'm thinking to myself, and by the way, about that time, I'm writing papers at Wayne State because you got to publish or perish. The stuff that I'm writing about is really, in my mind, not really making much of a difference. It's getting on my resume. You know, I've got enough publications, so I don't have to teach an extra course. But I'd been there long enough, and every year I'm talking about the same theories of crime and delinquency. I don't see any particular change out there in the amount of juvenile crime. And I'm kind of burned out. And so as a result of going to this conference, all of a sudden, there's a light that goes on. And I began working with Roger and some of the other people and sent my first papers in for peer review, and they got published eventually. And from that point on, you know, I was fortunate enough to see this thing transform, this thing develop. Thank God for Sydney Banks. And I'll tell you why, not just because he had this transformational experience and discovered the principles, because when Roger and some of the other people started putting this understanding into an ideology, he got pissed and said, no way, Jose, this is not something that's acceptable. And I can remember when this happened, all of a sudden, George Pransky took all of his tapes off the market. All of a sudden, Sydney Banks said, no more health realization, which is what it was called back then. And I remember talking to Jack Pransky and going, well, God, that's a great name and whatever. And then all of a sudden, I had this feeling of gratitude that, and also Sydney also said, you know, we don't want any credentialing going on. And so in my office, I am a certified psychology of mind practitioner because they were certifying people back then. That all stopped. And the gratefulness that I felt was from Sydney Banks saying, we don't want people to think that they're people who you need to look up to, gurus, you know, people who are in some way more, have more wisdom or well-being or understanding than anybody. And so as a result of all of that, you know, that was how my journey started. And so here we are.
Excellent. Tom, what would you say was your biggest insight that changed it all for you? You mentioned a light went on. What was that insight that sparked it for you?
Well, back when it first started for me, the insight for me was that I knew that the field of psychology and criminology were missing something. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that there was something else. Before, what I had to wean myself from like so many others who were pioneers in this, was the ideology that I was looking at life through, which was cognitive behavior therapy. So I knew that there was something important related to thought, but I was still looking out there at thought content. And it took a while. I remember when I was certified as a psychology of mind practitioner, the person that was making the decision was Sandy Crott. And there was no way, if I'd have been her back then, that I would have certified me, because I was still looking at things through cognitive behavioral perspective. But I knew that there was something there. The understandings that are so important for people to get. And as I was thinking about the presentation today, I was looking out there at the world and what's going on and seeing the innocence of this dysfunction that is so prominent here, at least in the US. That's what I'm most familiar with. This cancel culture that's emerged here, not the inability, but the people not being able to accept other people's points of view and wanting to cancel them because of that point of view. It's so sad. The inability of people to forgive, the amount of blaming that goes on. It's all innocent, but it's the lack of being able to see the most important things that I think the principles point to. And that is the power of thought, not what thought creates, but this incredible power that we have to create thoughts. People's misunderstanding or insufficient understanding of how thought works, that we have this incredible intelligence within us that, as far as I can see, is produced by thought, but it's produced by the intelligence that we're connected to, that when we are in that intelligence, we just get the thoughts that we need. And that intelligence will prompt us to move into what I would call personal thought or analytical thought, which is a wonderful ability. We have a wonderful use of the power of thought that we have. But in this country, I think it's been deified. I don't know how many people realize that there's really another way to use the power of universal mind to think. And so there's an incredible misuse of the power of thought. The literature calls it maladaptive repetitive thought, where people are getting thoughts of worry or anxiety or perfectionism or whatever, and they're hurting themselves with these thoughts, but they keep on doing it. In fact, I was just looking at one researcher's comment. He says, why do people keep doing it? Well, it's an interesting question. Why do people keep worrying? Why do people keep ruminating? Why do people keep thinking perfectionistic thoughts? Why do people create an ego or self-image? Okay. Well, as far as I can see, it's the best that they can do with their level of understanding of the principles of human psychological functioning. When you don't know how something works, you're going to misuse it. And so it's innocent, but it's horribly destructive. And so that's really what motivates me to keep writing and talking about what we've all, discovered.
Yeah. Tom, can you maybe talk a bit more about your engagements with Sid Banks, being one of the pioneers?
Well, my engagement with Sid really was being in the audience of some of his presentations and just simply being at a luncheon table sitting next to him during lunch one day. And so really, I don't have any particular stories about Sid other than those.
Yeah.
The two times that I was in the audience, very honestly, I was at a point in my level of understanding where a lot of what he said, I didn't understand. Because I was still caught up in my thought system of what mental health was and how to change it, how to fix it, how to improve it. And it's interesting now that I revisit some of his talks. Like one is the Great Illusion that I listened to recently. And now it just all makes sense to me. The only thing I remember when I was in high school and I took geometry, and I studied all of these things about geometry, etc. And then there was one day that I could actually speak geometry, and all of a sudden I could look at a problem and see the answer without going through all the steps. And that's kind of what I would relate what I just said about Sid's talks. All of a sudden, we were on the same page.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing, Tom. And Roger Mills, I know he wrote a foreword in, I think, both your books. Can you talk a little bit more about meeting him and your work that you guys have done together, if at all?
My work with who?
Roger Mills.
Oh, with Roger. Well, we really, Roger, reviewed my first book chapter by chapter. And it was interesting because Roger had a point of view back then, because my first book was I think in 1994, I think it came out. My God, that's almost 30 years ago. And that was back before, right on the cusp of where the principles were kind of changing from the ideology to the three principles. And, but Roger at that point had this idea that people should write where they were in their understanding. And Roger was in California, and George Pransky and I think Judy Sedgman were in La Conner, Washington. And they had some of my chapters as well in La Conner. And there was an argument between Roger and them about whether one of my chapters was right or wrong or whatever. And I remember talking with Roger, and he said, those damn people there, they're so particular about this and that and what have you. And it was interesting because I remember thinking, geez, Roger sounds angry. And I thought, there's no way that somebody who is a pioneer 10 years before me should be angry. So it kind of tells you where I was at about things. I had to go through my own evolution of understanding that understanding the principles doesn't mean that we don't have psychological weather that we go through. But Roger was really my role model because he was very, very prolific. I mean, he wrote a lot. I think he only had one journal article that was published. It was the first one published in Adolescence in 1988. but his other writing was helpful for me. And I probably plagiarized some of it when I was first starting out, because it was very helpful in getting my first papers done. So when he passed away, just a real sad experience for me.
Yeah, very good. Tom, I'm just conscious of the time. I'm going to take another 5 minutes just to talk about your book, and then I'll hand over to the audience. Upside Down, Inside Out, what inspired you to write another book?
Well, to be very honest with you, I think most people who are listening are aware of the podcast that Judy Sedgman and Christine Heath have called Psychology Has It Backwards. And around maybe their 30th or 31st episode, I think they're up to 110 or 120 now. And actually I've gotten word, I just heard that that their podcast in the area of psychology is either second or third most prominent, most listened to podcast, which is wonderful. But when I saw it, I said, this needs to be put into a book. And so I actually emailed Judy and Chris, and I said, look, if you're interested, I'm willing to pay for transcripts to be made of each of your thing, and maybe add some of my research to it. And I got an email back from Christine Heath, and she said, great minds, that's our goal. That's what we're planning to do. So at that point in time, I'd actually written a foreword to this kind of a book, etc. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll do a book. And so that was a big part of my motivation. The other part of it was I got the idea during the COVID experience. And I began to but I saw how COVID really kind of turned the rock over to the kind of hideous underbelly of mental health, or the lack of it, because COVID really was a good good way to see people's mental health or lack of it. And so this needs to be done. And so those were really the two things that motivated me to start working on the book.
Yeah, very good. Tom, what do you hope people take away from reading your book? What is the sort of key messages that you want to get people that sort of take away with them or hold on to?
Well, the book really, the main goal of the book is to point people toward understanding the principles. I wrote it in a way that hopefully will entice some academicians, some psychologists, some people in the field to take a closer look. I'm at a point in my career, and even if I was back at Wayne State, because, I got a lot of flack about writing about spiritual things and from colleagues and others at Wayne State. But I would never have stopped, because I just knew this was where my passion was. And so the goal was to write it in a way where people who are not academicians would still find it enjoyable and easy to read. And for people who are and who practice and who are clinicians, maybe to spark them, because I know that there are many of them out there that are like me, that are doing the best they can. But the research just shows that whatever people are doing out there is really not working that well. And what works really is the relationship. I mean, the evidence is that the thing that makes a difference is not the particular approach, but the relationship, the quality of the relationship. And as far as I can see, what happens if you're talking to someone who you know genuinely cares about you and is genuinely listening to you and is creating an environment that allows you to feel relaxed, to feel comfortable, then it's much more likely that you're going to get in touch with your innate health. You're going to get in touch with your own wisdom. Probably the one in the past, the approach that fits this more than any other is the approach used by Carl Rogers back in the day. And Rogers would just simply use empathy. He would just listen to people, send back to them in a paraphrase what they've said, and not give them answers. And many of them would get their own answers. But people keep evaluating the technique. And it's not the technique. So I talk about the outside in paradigm that psychology is hooked on, and how that can never lead to genuine, sustained well-being. And then I move into the principles, connect a lot of the research that I've done. One paper that was published, some of you may be aware of, the field of psychology has found that there appears to be one common factor in all mental illnesses. They've called it general factor P. Say every mental illness, there's this common factor. And now they're trying to find out what it is, but they're looking out there. And so Jack Pransky, Judy Sedgman, Bill Pettit, and I wrote a paper that was published in Spirituality and Clinical Practice called Only One Mental Illness. And now we're doing research. We actually, some of you may have responded to our survey that was out. We've actually had around 1,100 responses, and we're evaluating that research now so that we have some data to back this up. And one mental illness really is simply an insufficient understanding of the way the principles manifest within everyone to create their psychological lives. And if people have a low level of understanding of that, they're going to innocently misuse the power of thought. Then they're engaged in many different habits of maladaptive, repetitive thought. And then what's going to happen is that's going to create chronic mental stress. And if chronic mental stress proceeds, that's going to morph into a variety of symptoms that then psychologists will categorize and give a label to. So if psychology could get this, and it will, I mean, it will happen. It's beginning to happen. And that's really the motivation for me behind the book. Wonderful. Is to hopefully be a part of that impetus for it to happen.
Yeah. So I'm going to go quiet. I'm going to open up to the audience. We've got about 10, maybe 12 minutes left. So guys, over to you.
Could I make a comment, Rowan?
Go for it.
Hi, Tom. It's lovely to have you on board here. Such a privilege. I'm up to chapter 6 of your book and just love it. I'm going to say, like you, the one aspect for me that comes into this is separation. Like as a Course in Miracles student and lover of everything spiritual, to me it's that separation and also the dynamic between head and heart. It's dropping everything down into the heart and for me, it's simply asking what would love do now, and it's so different to what the ego would answer. That sort of simplifies it to me, and makes sense always. To me, it's a path of love, not fear. And the other comment I'd like to make, which I've always found Dr. David R. Hawkins, his work on the map of consciousness just blends into this so beautifully. It actually gives us a visual map and an understanding of consciousness and the levels that exist from the very bottom to the very top of enlightenment. And I found that quite a profound understanding as well, his work. But it's like all the work I've done, it's on myself. It's a spiritual intelligence that makes this three principles just so dynamic. It's almost like the tip of the iceberg is where psychology deals with, but this actually goes to the depth of life, to the bigger picture, to the evolutionary aspect of it. And it's just so powerful. But as you say, it's the empathy, just seeing ourselves as spiritual beings far more than as a human being. That to me is the key, and the beauty of the mind, that universal mind. Once we separate from that, we're in trouble. And acting like God is the key. You know, God is just everything, isn't it? It's just that unconditional acceptance, beauty, goodness, innate goodness within all of us that we've lost touch with. That's the beauty of the three principles. They're just profound.
Yeah. What your picture isn't up there for me to see. What's your name?
I'm Sue Hannah, Tom. I'm in
Sue.
Melbourne. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you. That was beautiful. I'd like the name David. Was it David Hawkins?
David R. Hawkins. He wrote the book Power versus Force back in the 80s or maybe 90s. Profound work he's done, written many books. And the map of consciousness is absolutely, well, it's based on kinesiology. He did much research on the topic. That was his field of expertise, and it's very profound.
When you use the word separation, could you define that for me? Not academically, but I want to make sure I'm on the same page.
Okay. Well, to me, it's either ego or spirit. And spirit to me is losing connection with that God force, with universal mind. It's the unseen, it's the metaphysical aspect of life. And if we're just dealing with the physical, I like to describe it as a car. Like if our body is the vehicle of a car, we need a driver, which is the mind, and we need a power source, which is the spirit. And we've also got an engine, which is our emotions. And unless we're aware of all four of them as a whole, like it's the wholeness of life, life just won't work. It's like having a crutch and only one, but we need four legs of a table to stand upright. And to me, that's it's about being a whole being, not a separated being. And the ultimate separation is from the God force or universal mind, infinite intelligence, whatever we want to call it.
Yes.
That to me is separation.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Rowan.
Thanks, Sue.
Damn, I wish you guys could see me.
Me too.
Yeah.
Next up. Anyone else for a question or some comments?
Come on, somebody, so I can see up close.
Could I ask another question then, if no one else is forthcoming?
Matthew was just about to ask one too.
Oh, go for it. Okay.
Thanks. Cheers. No, it probably won't take too long to answer. I was interested in your comment, Tom, about that real optimism you have that it's starting to happen. That the understanding of the three principles or something like that is starting to take effect in the field of psychology. And I was just wondering, what were the indicators for you to share that? What are you seeing? Because I work as a psychologist here in Sydney, and I must admit I'm not seeing it, but I'm not an academic. I'm a clinician, and I'm sort of I'd love to see it, but I just haven't seen it yet. Thanks.
Great question. What I've seen when I first started writing, and I would send my papers out to journals, I would think, oh my God, they're going to love this. And it would come back with rejection, page after page of reasons why, just looking at what I was writing through this rigid ideology. As time has gone by, there's much more openness in the field to consider spiritual ideas and writings. There are journals, for example, the American Psychological Association now has a journal called Spirituality in Clinical Practice. And that opened up. There is another journal called Spirituality in Mental Health. Another one called Journal for the Study of Spirituality. The one I just mentioned, the International Journal of Children's Spirituality. These are fairly new journals, maybe 5 to 8 years old. And so something is happening within the field. I mean, there are others that have been around for a long time. They typically were connected with religion and certain ideologies. Some of these journals, however, have been kind of caught up in, for example, the APA journal initially could send a paper that didn't have data in it. Now this journal is you got to have journal data to get into it. So, you know, the ideological things are happening within these journals. The fact that maybe you weren't here when we started, the fact that the Spark education program has now gotten a multi-year, multi-million-dollar grant from the U.S. Department of Education. That's an amazing breakthrough. And I think that will lead to many, many good things in the area of education. The fact that in the UK, and I don't know, maybe in your areas as well, the word that I've heard is that this understanding has caught on and gone wildfire, even more so in the UK than in the US. That suggests something to me along those lines. The other thing is just simply when you know, people would say, Sydney Banks would get a question from the audience, and people would say, well, Sid, how do you know this is true? And Sid would say, because I know. And then he would say something like, there's knowing, and then there's knowing. When you see something that is the truth, sooner or later it has to catch on. Right? You know, there's still over 400 different therapies out there. So thank God I don't go to the bulletin board anymore in the summer and try to figure out where to go. What a privilege to live life knowing that before I die, I've seen the truth. You know, it's not like I'm about ready to die thinking, God, was cognitive behavior therapy the right? No, I don't know. Well, you know, somebody will figure it out. So that's what comes to mind about your question.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
One last one. We've got a couple of minutes.
Could I ask again? Tom,
Sure.
could I just get you to ask you, what do you think is the difference between emotions and feelings? Like, to me, a feeling is like you say, you just know it's something deep within you that feels right. Whereas an emotion to me is more of a reaction to something happening on the outside of us.
Good question.
What's your question? How do you answer that?
Way back they made distinctions between emotions and feelings, and the distinction I think was an accurate distinction. I think that there are emotions that are innate. and oftentimes with my clients to try to get a point across, somebody will come in with a 2-year-old child and I say, well, did you have to teach your child to be curious? Did you have to teach your child to be loving? Did you have to teach your child to be exhilarated? George Pransky made a very interesting distinction between exhilaration and excitement. Exhilaration is just a natural feeling that I think most children are born into, where there's just a pizzazz about being alive. Excitement is learned, and it has to be recreated over and over and over again. You know, you don't want to take a 2-year-old on a roller coaster. But when the 2-year-old begins to see that everybody loves roller coasters and the feeling that they get, and a lot of excitement is really thought. I mean, it's not the roller coaster that causes excitement, it's thought, but it's a learned feeling. So exhilaration versus excitement. You know, curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a client the other day, well, curiosity, well, you know, if everybody's curious, you know, I forget what his question was. He said, and my response was, well, if you've got 2 kids that are curious, one is going to be directed toward, let's say, a painting in the room, and maybe is fascinated by that painting. The other might be directed toward a clock and want to take the clock apart. So I think curiosity is this innate feeling that we have, and we're not even aware of using it, but I think that the curiosity directs us toward what our essence is meant for. That's just a thought. And then we get distracted from that. You know, I had a police officer who, his father, his brothers, everybody was a police officer. So he had to be a police officer. Came in to see me. He was depressed. We started talking, and you know what he really wanted to be? Can you imagine being this guy with all, he wanted to be a hairdresser. Really, it was what turned him on. That was his essence. And he was almost suicidal because he just hated policing. So, you know, fortunately, we were able to talk about this, and he was able to understand what this meant by essence, heart, the separation, you know, and all of that. And he finally, and he got a lot of flack. In fact, there were a couple of family members that disowned him for a while. But he was following his heart. Great question. Does that help with the distinction? I just think emotions, if we want to call them that, are just simply these innate expressions that are not taught. They're not learned. They're what universal mind designed us with.
Yes. I think A Course in Miracles is the last part of the book is on a manual for teachers, and they talk about the qualities or the characteristics of a teacher of God. And the first one is trust. So you have to trust in something bigger than yourself. But the other ones are honesty, tolerance, gentleness, joy, defenselessness, generosity, patience, faithfulness, and open-mindedness. And I think spiritually, if we just came from those, if we just acted with those qualities, that's enough, you know, to say every day I'm going to pick one of those and act like that.
Well, I think that's who we all are. That's who we are. We're all of those. Yeah.
I agree. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
So that brings us to the end. I just want to take a moment to firstly thank you, Tom, for spending your Saturday night with us. It's a problem of being down under. We try and accommodate as much as we can people either in the UK or the US, but I really appreciate you taking the time. And again, for the work you're doing as well, we're getting a lot of benefit out of it. it is reference material for me personally. And I remember one of the things that I always picked up from your book is the whole thing about analytical thought versus free-flowing thought. And I still use it quite often in my work with clients to describe sort of the mental flu and how things work and the misunderstanding that's along that. So thank you very much. I get a lot of value from it. And everyone else, thank you for showing up on a Sunday morning. Really appreciate you taking the time. Have a lovely day, everyone, and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank all of you. My pleasure.
Thanks, Tom. See everyone later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You too. Oh, are
Thank
you still
you.
there?
I
Oh,
am.
one thing, by the way, if anybody wants to email me to see I've got, again, perfectionism, forgiveness, repetitive thought, this stuff, anybody wants any of that, just email me and I'm happy to send you a copy.
Tom, what I'll do if
Yeah.
you want, I'll if you can email it to me and I can share this with the group if you want.
What I'll do is I'll email you copies of all those papers. I would request, though, you keep them private because they're out at journals being reviewed.
Okay,
So
perfect.
it's fine with me. Okay, sure, I'll do that.
Will do. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Looking forward
you're
to it.
welcome. Bye-bye.
Tom.
Thanks, everyone.
Amazing.
Bye.
Bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.